Hey guys, I'm Jax, and this is my spoiler review for the new Hunger Games prequel, The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful. I'll be the first to admit, bit of a mouthful. But now having seen the film, I think it is actually a very accurate description of the film. For one, lots of snakes. We've got villains with snakes. We've got heroes with snakes. We even have characters that you may refer to as a bit of a snake. And then we've got the songbirds. There's actual birds that sing songs. There's characters that are referred to as songbirds because they sing. And there are even birds that sing a bit of a song in the way that they record what people say, like some kind of magical wiretapping bird situation. But the part of the title that really baffled me at first, but makes the most sense now I've seen the movie, is The Ballad of. Why The Ballad of? Why not The Tale of? Or more accurately for a villain origin story, Hunger Games origin prequel story situation, The Rise of, The Dawn of, or another overused thing in film titles. Why The Ballad of? What is this, some kind of musical? It's not a musical, is it? It is. It is a musical. This movie's a musical. I counted 8 songs in this movie. 8 songs sung by people in the movie like it's a musical. There are more songs in this than the musical La La Land. Like, not just more, like double, maybe triple. I lost count at 8. I think there might have been 9 or 10. I am overwhelmed by how much I enjoyed this film. So let's dive straight into spoilers. So, Peter Dinklage in this film plays the creator of the Hunger Games, and in an absolutely tragic and brilliant and heartbreaking but kind of exhilarating and horrifying scene right at the end of the movie, we find out how the Hunger Games was created. And I cannot stress enough how much I love the fact that I live in a world in which Tyrion Lannister, whilst drunk, as a joke, pitched the most insane, crazy thing to do to the uprisers, to the people who have lost the war. He's like, okay, I've got to come up with an idea whilst drunk as a joke. Like, what's the worst, most over-the-top, insane thing we can do to these people so that they never do an uprising and a war ever again? And that was The Hunger Games. A truly wonderful and heartbreaking reveal, but of course, in true Tyrion fashion, in true show Tyrion fashion, he wakes up all hungover and immediately regrets it, but it's too late. Young sexy Snow's father steals the idea, and the rest is history. Or more accurately, the rest is a very successful YA novel/film series. Peter Dinklage's performance in this film is fantastic. It is somber, it is heartbreaking. He brings so much gravitas to his character and just the whole film in general. Every scene he is in, he absolutely steals. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that everyone else is bad and he's like the standout. Every single person in this film is an absolute standout. I've never seen Tom Blythe in anything before, but his performance as young sexy Snow is amazing. There were so many moments in this film that I was just like in love with his character, and then I had to be like, whoa, Jax, calm down, Jax. This is a villain origin story. He is not going to end this movie in a good place. You don't fall in love with this guy, but he's so awesome in this film. There are so many moments where you totally sympathize with him and understand where he's coming from. I'll get into all of his character stuff later because that's the big, main, interesting stuff that I think they really, really nailed. But his performance throughout it, the moments that you're meant to kind of like him, and then that slow, inevitable descent into the villain that we know from the original Recipe Hunger Games films is incredible. A very, very good performance. Our other lead in Rachel Zegler, everybody's favorite Disney princess, is so good. I cannot overemphasize how amazing I thought she was in this film. I have to be honest, her first moment in the film I found to be quite jarring, and it took me a little time to kind of warm up to her. She opens with a song, and it really kind of annoyed me where she does the bow, the Katniss Everdeen bow, and she does it like so similarly where I'm like, oh, I get it. It's like a reference to the original films, but it's a prequel. So I just didn't really like that. And the song, her first song, is just like, I don't know, it's a little jarring at first because I didn't realize this was going to be a musical. Well, a musical in that Rachel Zegler sings like 8 songs in this movie. 8 completely different, separate, unique songs that every single one of them, except for the first one, are amazing. She brings so much emotion and power to the performance. There are so many, just so many songs in this movie, and I thought every single one except for the first one. But I imagine on a rewatch I'll probably really enjoy that, because I know that's what the film is doing. But at first I was like, ooh, no, I don't like, this is jarring with the film. But then you realize the place these songs have in the film, and her voice. Her voice is astonishing. She sounds like a goddess. There are songs that are gonna make you laugh, that are gonna make you cry, that are gonna make you feel like you need to uprise and take down the system. She just does everything, and I just loved how not only is her voice just utterly spectacular and just glory to the ears, just a glorious singing voice, but the power and the emotion that comes from these singing moments is just spectacular, which is why it really does feel like this is a musical. And the last actor that I want to shout out is our crazy mad scientist game maker, Viola Davis. Oh my lord, is this woman teetering on the line of taking this way too far? No person has ever chewed so much scenery and come so close to chewing just a little bit too much scenery, but somehow managed to balance it where the scenery chewing moments don't become farcical and comedic and become almost like a parody kind of mad scientist crazy character, because she is just a very generic, insane, mad scientist. She's got jars and vats of liquid and creatures inside of them that she's doing experiments on, and all this classic cliche mad scientist stuff, but her performance is so fun. It's so engaging and interesting, and at times absolutely volatile and terrifying. There are moments where she kind of comes out as the most villainous character in the movie, and yet just when you think it's going to go over the line and it's going to become too much, she just brings it down and brings just enough nuance to this mad scientist character. I just found it so compelling and so interesting, and she works as a really good kind of counterbalance to young, sexy Snoke as she kind of poses questions to him throughout the film. I particularly love the kind of reoccurring thing where she's like, what does the Hunger Games mean to you? And at the start of the film, he says one thing, and then right at the end of the film, she's like, so, before we journey on into the rest of the franchise or whatever, what does the Hunger Games mean to you again? And it was just a really interesting balance of like, she's here, he's there, and they slowly kind of find like a meeting spot where they agree on what the Hunger Games means to them and why the Hunger Games need to exist. It's fascinating, it's terrifying, it's exhilarating, but she is so close to chewing too much scenery. I can definitely see some people being like, no, over the top and ridiculous, not a fan. But this guy, a big fan. But to be fair, one of my favorite characters in fiction is the mad scientist who's got giant vats of liquid and there's a creature in there and you're like, is that just one of the weird creatures? Because we've got just birds that mimic your voice and record it like some kind of wiretapping situation. So is this just a creature? Or is this some kind of horrific nightmare mutant creature she's created? She's got snakes at one point, because lots of snakes in the film. And she's like, I want them to be rainbowy. And he's like, why? And she's like, so rainbows rain down on my enemies. And I'm like, oh yeah. What? So unlike the first two Hunger Games films, which are split into two parts, the pre-Hunger Games and then the Hunger Games, this film is split into three parts, and I found that to be very interesting and very compelling and a nice little wrinkle onto the Hunger Games franchise as a whole. It was so kind of refreshing to have the film not end when the Hunger Games itself ended. I actually think part two, the Hunger Games, was actually probably my least favorite part of the film. I thought part one and part three were the standouts. I did really like the part two of the Hunger Games. I love how this kind of old school way of doing the Hunger Games was more of a gladiator situation. But like the original two films which feature the Hunger Games, I do think it loses something when it becomes a PG-13 Hollywoodization version of Battle Royale, and it's a bloodless affair. And so the shock and horror and awe and devastation and the heartbreak and the disgusting nature of putting 24 children in a kill or be killed Battle Royale situation, a lot of the kind of horror of that is lost when it's bloodless and PG-13. And Some of the action is quite compelling and interesting, and I love the fact that it's just in one gladiator ring. I would really love to see some horrible, brutal kills to really emphasize and kind of hammer home the point the film is trying to make with the Hunger Games. But hey, they want it to be for a broad audience, and they're not going to make this film MA when the others have been PG-13. So I understand. I do understand, but it is a little bit disappointing nonetheless. And for me, part 1 and part 3 of this film, really focusing on character and the world building of this crazy dystopian universe, is far more interesting. A thing that I really loved in this film was the aesthetic of the film. Seeing the Hunger Games with this kind of retro old school kind of vibe, the screens and the computers and the technology they're using has a really interesting and unique flavor compared to the original films that are set 65 years later or whatever it is. Another visual difference from this prequel to the film set 65 years later that I thought worked really, really well, and I think they did a more effective job in, is that instead of the Capitol having all these people with overly colorful and crazy makeup and just, it's all vibrant and colorful and ridiculously over the top, this time, all the Capitol people that we follow, particularly the main 24 mentors to the 24 tributes, the first time there are mentors to the tributes, these mentors aren't wearing big colorful costumes that are just ridiculous, and people's beards aren't shaved into ridiculous whatever was going on in that first film with that guy's beard. This time, all the Capitol fancy pants people kind of, it feels more realistic in the fact that they are all just dressed like fancy pants private school kids. They are all just dressed like private school kids, and I thought that was really effective. It really spoke to where this society is at this point, and it made a really blunt and obvious, yes, very blunt and obvious, but effective kind of message about the private school kids who are mentoring for money and prestige these tributes. And the tributes in this, like, we've gotten tributes before in Hunger Games 1 and Hunger Games 2, but they never really felt as poor and dirty and downtrodden as they do in this film. In this film, our 24 tributes are dirty, and just like literally physically dirty, but mentally dirty, and it just had this grimy sense where it's just, they were just covered in dirt. No one washed them up and made them look pretty for the cameras because they haven't got to that point yet where they've accepted that they're going to make them into the spectacles that they do in the original films. So they're still kind of ironing those kinks out as this film kind of is the origins of that, kind of taking the tributes from just being people who were killed to send a message into being these spectacles, these things that people want to watch and want to see win or lose. And just having them be so grimy and dirty compared to their mentors who were just in private school clothes, I found to be very visually interesting. And it just hammered home that very blunt and obvious message, but I think it did it very effectively. The way this film blended the origins of the Hunger Games, or what we know of the Hunger Games in the original movies, and the origin of young sexy Snow turning into the villain, and the way they combined and blended those two origins together and having Snow's character kind of descending into darkness via making the Hunger Games what we know of the Hunger Games, I found to be really, really interesting and kind of ingenious. The premise of this film of setting up these 24 privileged, fancy pants, private school kids who all think they're out to win this big prestigious award, but hey, no, you're not going to win it because you're smart and clever and you did good in your grades. You've got to make your tribute be interesting, engaging, and likable. And so it's like the origins of the sponsors of the Hunger Games and the way that young sexy Snow, the way he kind of taps into that kind of really horrible part of humanity, and he's like, we're going to make you very likable, and then they're going to want to give you things. They're going to donate to you, sponsor you, and want you to win, and they will watch you. They will watch you kill other people and maybe be killed if they want to see you succeed in this Hunger Games situation. And he breathes new life into the Hunger Games, and I just found it so horrifying and terrifying, but so true. I felt like it was such a true statement for what they were doing. They were just doing classic gladiator stuff. But if you give people a reason to root for somebody, they are going to tune in for some absolutely horrendous horrors. And it really spoke to me, because of course this is like a 20 out of 10 kind of situation. It's a dystopian fantasy movie, but it really reminded me of how I watch like movies. Like I will watch some horrendous things happen to characters that I love if I think there is a chance of hope, a chance that they will win, a chance that they will overcome these horrible circumstances. And I will watch some horrible things happen in a movie if I think the person I am like rooting for can succeed. And that's what young sexy Snow kind of taps into in this movie. And all of that in the setup in part 1 leading into part 2 with the Hunger Games, I thought was just so effective and so just, I don't know, it was overwhelming because I was like, why is it going to be the 10th Hunger Games? Why not do the original Hunger Games? Because in the original first Hunger Games, they just threw 24 people in and who cares? They'll just kill each other and whatever. This time, they are creating a reason for making the people watch, a reason for them to root for someone in this horrible Hungry Games. But I love the fact that young sexy Snow doesn't pitch these ideas and doesn't create the games that we know with sponsors and drones coming in, dropping gifts and all these things and creating a spectacle of the tributes. He doesn't pitch these ideas out of some kind of malicious, sadistic kind of dark-seated, oh, he's always been evil deep down inside. It's like, no. This guy lives in the capital. He lives amongst the rich in a family that was once very rich and very well thought of, and now they are poor. They have no money. He is essentially someone from the districts in the fact that he is poor and doesn't have all of these wonderful things and money and riches and success and all these things. He's essentially masquerading as a fancy pants private school boy. He's like a poor sheep in wolf's clothing. And so much of this film is him being like, okay, so I've got to help Rachel Zegler do a Hunger Games, but like, I want her to win so that I can get money, so I can kind of rise above my station and become and have the things that I think, and he kind of thinks he deserves. So there's definitely a bunch of narcissism and power hungry stuff boiling inside of him. But there's also just a need to kind of provide for his family and to have enough money for his family. Like he starts off being like, I just want money for my family. Something we can all relate to. We all want money to provide for the people we love for. So he starts off at this very innocent place. And yes, there are definitely moments that become a little generic, like he has to get into the Hunger Games to talk to that other guy and get him out of there, and he has to kill someone. He hits them with a big hammer stone thingy or whatever, and he has a mildly generic kind of villain origin story line where he's like, oh, I had to kill someone, and oh yeah, it was awful, but also it made me feel powerful. And so yes, there are moments that feel mildly generic, but I think the way that they start him off and they slowly descend into a character that starts becoming more power hungry throughout the film and start kind of focusing more on the success, I just found that to be very compelling. And I just love the fact that he sets out at first to help Lucy Gray because he needs to do things for his own personal gain, for money, for his family. All these things we can totally relate to. But then as the film progresses and they get to know each other, and there's a bit of a love romance, because of course this is a YA novel. Of course there's going to be a romance. There's no threesome love triangle situation. This time it's just a more kind of rags to riches or rags and riches love story situation. But I think the way they kind of progress the story with these two really, really interesting. And of course we have some, once again, mildly generic moments where she saves his life when she totally didn't need to, and so later on he saves her life and he cheats, and then they throw him down to the districts and he shaves his beautiful hair. Oh, the moment where he shaves his hair and he loses all his beautiful blonde locks and he just goes army shaved haircut. You're like, okay, he thinks he's going there for love, but he's shaved his head, and that's a villain haircut if I've ever seen one. Not throwing shade to anyone who has like bald hair, but it was like a moment where I'm like, he shaved off the hair, but I feel like with that hair, he has lost also, you know, some hero things, and he's shaved off the goodness of him. Or maybe I just missed those beautiful blonde locks. I found the love story between young sexy Snow and Lucy Gray very, very interesting. And I wonder if it's because of that kind of inevitable knowing thing where you're like, I know that this isn't going to work out because I know this is a villain origin story. And so it just has this kind of horrible, inevitable like tragedy to it. Like that whole part 3 where he's hanging out with Lucy Gray and they're hanging out in District 12, and District 12 doesn't even seem that bad. She's playing concerts and they're having fun, and everyone seems to have enough money to drink and sing and dance and have a good time. They're partying at the lake. They're just having fun, and just, it's so lovey-dovey and beautiful, but there's just this underlining current of dread and tension under all of it, because you just know this isn't going to work out. And I also love that there's never really a point with young sexy Snow where he goes, yeah, you know what, actually, District 12's pretty great. Like, there are so many little moments where he's like, yeah, I mean, District 12, it's fine, but I can't wait to get back to the capital. You're coming back to the capital with me, right? Like, we're going to do that. And she's like, it's not that bad here. And he's like, oh, I mean, like, it's fine. But so, like, he's in love with her, but I almost wonder, is he more in love with the idea of being in love with someone? Like, is it really true love? Because he doesn't ever have a moment where he goes, hey, yeah, let's just go and be in District 12 and I'll live here forever. He always, underneath it all, has the ambition and the drive and the want, the narcissistic want and need to go back and to succeed and to have the money, to have the power, and all those things that were slowly creeping up throughout the film. And yes, there is a point that him and Lucy Gray go off into the wilderness towards the end of the film, but that's only because he has to, because he shot a bunch of people and it was the mayor's daughter and all this kind of stuff. So he had to do that. It was like out of necessity, out of like survival. It wasn't he's like, let's run away together because I'm in love. Like, yes, maybe he is in love with her in some way, but I just found that really interesting, where it's like, it almost felt like a love story, but I don't know if this character was ever truly in love with her, more so at least in love with the idea of being successful and powerful back at the capital. And I always felt that with the character. I think his performance was so spectacular. It absolutely nailed, at least what I got from him, in that he is in this position, which I feel like most people, if you're in love with a beautiful, wonderful woman like Rachel Zegler with the voice of an angel, and you're living, and they don't make District 12 to seem like an absolute pile of trashy, nothing, disgusting, horrible hovel that I kind of always imagined it was. The way that I always imagined the districts in the original Hunger Games is these horrible, desolate, awful places, whereas they actually position it and they frame it as a kind of an amazing place. Like that bar where Lucy Gray's singing and stuff, that seems awesome. That seems like a place I'd like to go on the weekend. And so I love that they frame it like this, and yet he never kind of falls into like love with District 12. He's always wanting to escape. I just found it so fascinating and interesting and kind of scary and horrifying, but really, really great to just follow this character that has so many moments throughout the film where he's heroic and you could see him becoming a Katniss Everdeen hero of the moment, but he just keeps succumbing to these kind of more base instincts of power and success and money, and just get back to that horrible, oppressive capital. Because that's where he's from. He grew up in the capital against the districts, and he still has a bit of a chip on his shoulder in regards to the districts, in regards to what he sees them as. And it's this really interesting way of like how a person who may have good intentions and may be able to fall in love with someone from a different place still kind of is shaped by the world he was brought up in, and is never really able to kind of get out of the fact that he was brought up in this horrible war, and that he just sees the districts and he sees the capital in a certain way. And all of that I just found to be so fascinating and interesting. And it builds up to that point where when he is in that cabin right at the end and he accidentally says he's murdered 3 people, not 2. And Lucy Gray's like, what do you mean? You've only killed 2 people. Who's the 3rd one? And he's like, I've got a pretty good lie. I killed myself. I shed the skin that was young sexy Snoke to be a different young sexy Snoke. I don't mean Snoke, I mean Snow. I'm just getting confused because of Andor, and they had the origins of young sexy Snoke in that. I love villain origin stories where like, you know, the awful gross adult villain? What about young sexy version of them? It's a favorite of mine. And that moment in the cabin, oh my lord, I 100% thought he was going to shoot her. Like, he's like, oh my god, the gun. I can just get rid of this gun and I can go back to the capital. No more loose ends. Ha ha ha. And then she's like, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a loose end. And then suddenly she's like, oh my god, I'm a loose end. And he's like, oh my god, she's a loose end. And I'm like, I felt like the cinema was silent. Like you could drop a pin and you could hear it. It was so silent. And the cinema was pretty packed. I see a lot of films opening day and they are never this packed. People were coming to see this movie. It was kind of exciting. And no, it was just so silent. It was just such an intense moment of dread and suspense where it was like, he could totally kill her. And I'm pretty glad he didn't. I feel like that would be almost too brutal and horrible. But I love that moment where I was just like, oh no, I don't know if he loves her enough to not kill her, or if he really is going to go that far down the deep end so early and kill her. And then of course he runs through the woods, he tries to take a couple of shots at her, and then the magical wiretap birds of repeating the things you say were flying about, and he shot a bunch of them, and he ran around and he screamed, and the movie ended and he was sad. And then he killed Tyrion Lannister and he was like, I guess I've upgraded to villainy. God, I loved this movie so much. I am so surprised by how much I loved this movie. I found it so enthralling and entertaining and terrifying and captivating and other big words that describe good things in a movie. I loved it. I really, really loved this film. I thought it did such an exceptional job. I can't believe I like the Hunger Games franchise so much. I just, literally 4 days ago, if you were like, do you like the Hunger Games? I would have been like, it's fine. No, I'm more of a Battle Royale guy. Now I'm like, no, screw Battle Royale. Hunger Games is my jam. I like both. I can like two things. Oh, also, I really, really liked young Sexy Snow's best friend who comes from money, and his dad paid for him to get into the capital from District 2, and he's like, I hate this place, everyone sucks! And I thought that was a really great contrast where he just absolutely loathes and hates the Hunger Games. It's good to have someone in the capital that just so actively hates them. But I thought the really interesting wrinkle onto that character and the really good contrast with him and young Sexy Snow was that every time he made a really dangerous decision against the system, his dad could just kind of like buy his way out of it. So he was never really in full danger. And so with Snow, if Snow was doing any of the things that this guy did, he would just be killed because he doesn't have a family with money and big money that can buy himself out of these situations. And I just think that's so true to life, where it's like a poor person cannot do the same things a rich person can do. A rich person can buy their way out of situations. A poor person cannot. And the way that they were so opposed in how they viewed the Hunger Games and this world and the capital, but because of their situations, one could do a thing about it and one kind of couldn't. And the way that that contrast was in characters, I thought was really, really compelling and kind of confronting and horrible in a lot of ways. I thought it was very, very well done. And whilst the fact that he recorded him with one of those magical wiretapping birds at the end, and like the guy didn't think maybe he was going to use one of these wiretapping birds that are like right there, that's like their job. They like wiretap you. The magical wiretapping birds, they're right there. They're right there. And he didn't notice, and that comes back to bite him. And that's almost silly, dumb, and ridiculous. And it almost doesn't work. But I think the fact that Snow does that, young Sexy Snow does that in that moment and betrays his only true friend for power, success, and money, all the bad guy things. He does this moment, and then he just stands there with his gun as a guard as he gets hung, and it is heartbreaking and devastating. And so for a character perspective, we're following young Sexy Snow in this movie. He's our lead. We're watching his descent. We're watching him go from Anakin Skywalker to a Darth Vader. Spoilers, they were the same guy. He has this really horrible choice, and he chooses to betray his friend. And so despite magical bird wiretapping being silly, I think it doesn't come across as silly because of the character moment. And I found that very sad. And it was like an inevitable moment you knew was coming for the whole part 3. You just know it's happening. As soon as he gets on the train, he's like, I'm coming too, young Sexy Snow. I'm like, you're going to die and he'll probably kill you. And the way he did it, where he didn't just shoot him, it was like this horrible backstabbing betrayal, and he just kind of stands there in silence. It's like, I love this movie. I cannot believe I love this movie. This might be my second favorite movie of the year. It's almost as good as Guardians of the Galaxy 3. It's almost as good as that, with characters I've loved for 10 years, with these characters I just met today. It's crazy. I don't know why I loved it so much. I guess because it's good? Mostly probably though, because it's a musical. I don't understand why they decided to make it a musical, but they did and I love it.